90% of people will never become anything more than average. Not because they lack talent, not because they don't have opportunities, but because they choose it every single day without even realizing it. They make decisions that keep them exactly where they are. They wake up in the morning, reach for their phone, and lose themselves in endless scrolling. Minutes turn into hours, and hours disappear without purpose. And somewhere in their mind, a quiet voice whispers, "I'll start tomorrow." But tomorrow never comes. Days slowly turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. And before they even realize it, years have passed. Their life becomes a repeated pattern, a loop they don't even question anymore. Wake up, do the bare minimum, stay comfortable, distract yourself, and repeat. No real growth. No real progress. Just movement without direction. And the most dangerous part is, it feels normal. They convince themselves they're trying. They believe they're working hard. But deep down, they are avoiding something. They are avoiding discomfort. They are avoiding discipline. They are avoiding the effort it takes to truly change, because real change is not easy. It demands sacrifice. It demands consistency. It demands showing up even when you don't feel like it. And most people are not willing to do that. So they settle, not because they have to, but because it's easier. Easier to stay where they are. Easier to delay action. Easier to live in comfort instead of facing the pain of growth. And slowly, without noticing, average becomes their identity. Not because they were meant to be average, but because they accepted it. Because every day they chose comfort over growth, distraction over focus, excuses over discipline. And that is why 90% of people stay exactly where they are. Not because they can't do more, but because they won't. The biggest reason why people stay average is not lack of intelligence. It's not lack of resources. It's comfort. The comfort zone feels safe, predictable, easy. It protects you from failure. It protects you from rejection. It protects you from discomfort. But at the same time, it slowly destroys your potential. Because nothing grows in comfort. Think about it. Every time you choose what's easy, you move further away from what's possible. You choose to stay in bed instead of waking up early. You choose entertainment instead of improvement. You choose excuses instead of action. And in the moment, it feels harmless. It feels like a small decision. But these small decisions stack up day after day, choice after choice. They build your life, and before you realize it, you're stuck in a routine that feels comfortable, but leads nowhere. That's the trap. The comfort zone doesn't look dangerous. It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like peace, but it's not peace. It's stagnation, because while you're staying comfortable, others are pushing forward. While you're delaying action, others are building discipline. While you're waiting for the right time, others are creating it. And slowly, the gap grows, not because they are better than you, but because they are willing to feel uncomfortable. That's the difference. Growth begins where comfort ends. The moment you decide to do the hard thing, even when you don't feel ready. That's the moment your life starts to change. But most people never reach that moment because the comfort zone whispers lies. It tells you, you have time, start later, rest a little more, and you believe it. Until one day, you look back and realize you've been standing in the same place for years, not moving forward, just staying comfortable. And that is why 90% of people never escape average. Not because they can't, but because they refuse to leave what feels easy. Another reason why 90% of people stay average is distraction. Not because they don't have time, but because their attention is constantly being stolen every day without realizing it. They give away their focus to their phones, to social media, to endless content that adds no value. One video turns into 10, 10 turns into hours, and suddenly, the day is gone. No progress, no growth, just consumption. And the worst part is, it feels productive. You tell yourself you're learning. You tell yourself you're staying updated, but deep down, you're just distracted. Because real growth requires deep focus. It requires silence. It requires discipline. And most people can't sit with their own thoughts anymore. The moment things get quiet, they reach for distraction. Because distraction is easy. It gives instant pleasure. No effort. No discomfort. Just escape. But every time you escape, you delay your future. Every scroll, every click, every wasted hour is time you will never get back. And while you're distracted, someone else is focused. While you're consuming, someone else is creating. While you're watching others succeed, someone else is becoming successful. That's the difference. Successful people protect their attention. They understand. Where focus goes, energy flows. And where energy flows, results follow. But average people give their attention away for free to things that don't matter, to things that don't move them forward. And slowly, their potential fades, not because they're not capable, but because they're constantly distracted. And in a world full of noise, focus has become a superpower that only a few choose to develop. And that is why most people stay average, not because they lack ability, but because they lack control over their own attention. Another reason why 90% of people stay average is fear. Not fear of trying, but fear of failing. Fear of being judged, fear of looking foolish, fear of not being good enough. And this fear controls their decisions. It keeps them stuck. Because every time they think about doing something bigger, their mind stops them. What if I fail? What will people think? What if I'm not ready? And just like that, they don't start. Not because they can't, but because they're afraid. Afraid to step outside what feels safe. Afraid to take a risk. Afraid to be seen struggling. So instead, they choose to stay invisible. They stay where it's comfortable, where it's predictable, where failure is less likely. But so is success. Because the truth is, you cannot grow without failure. You cannot improve without mistakes. You cannot succeed without first being uncomfortable. Every successful person you see today has failed. Not once, not twice, but countless times. The only difference is they didn't stop. They didn't let fear decide their future. They acted anyway, even when they were unsure, even when they felt unprepared, because they understood something most people don't. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of it. Every mistake teaches you something. Every setback makes you stronger. Every failure moves you forward. But average people never experience this because they avoid failure completely. And by avoiding failure, they avoid growth. They avoid progress. They avoid becoming who they could have been. And slowly, their fear becomes their limit. A limit they never question. A limit they accept as reality. But it's not reality, it's a choice. A choice to stay safe instead of becoming stronger. And that is why 90% of people stay average. Not because they are not capable, but because they let fear control their actions. It's not the big mistakes that keep people average. It's the small things they fail to repeat. Day after day, they rely on how they feel. If they feel good, they work. If they don't, they stop. And that's the problem. Because feelings are unstable. They change constantly. One day you're focused. The next day you're distracted. One day you're motivated. The next day you're tired. And if your actions depend on your feelings, your progress will always be inconsistent. That's why most people never move forward. Not because they don't start, but because they don't continue. They wait for the perfect mood, the perfect energy, the perfect moment. But those moments are rare. And success cannot be built on something unreliable. It requires something stronger. It requires commitment, the ability to show up, even when you don't feel like it. Even when it's boring. Even when it's repetitive. Especially when it's repetitive. Because repetition is where transformation happens. Not in one big action, but in small actions, done again and again. Most people ignore this. They chase excitement. They chase quick results. But real progress is quiet. It's slow. It's steady. And it demands patience, the kind of patience most people don't have. So they stop. Right before things start to change, right before results begin to show. And then they say, it didn't work. But the truth is, they didn't stay consistent long enough for it to work. Because consistency is not just an action, it's a decision you make daily to keep going, no matter what. And the people who understand this are the ones who break the cycle, while everyone else stays stuck in the same pattern, starting, stopping, starting again, but never truly moving forward. And that is why most people never rise above average, not because they lack ability, but because they lack consistency when it matters the most. Most people don't fail because life is hard. They fail because their mindset is weak. The moment things get difficult, they start looking for a way out. Not a way through, a way out. They say things like, it's too hard, I'm not ready, I don't have time. But these are not reasons. They are excuses. Excuses that sound valid, but hide the truth. The truth that they don't want to face. Because taking responsibility is uncomfortable. It's easier to blame circumstances. Easier to blame time. Easier to blame luck. Easier to say, I'll do it later. But later becomes never. And slowly, excuses become a habit, a pattern of thinking that keeps them small. Because every excuse is a decision. A decision to stay the same. A decision to avoid growth. A decision to protect comfort instead of building strength. Strong people think differently. They don't ask, why is this happening to me? They ask, what can I do about it? They take ownership, even when it's not their fault. Because they understand, responsibility gives power, and excuses take it away. The moment you start making excuses, you give control of your life to something else. Your mood, your environment, your situation. And once you lose control, you stop growing. That's why mindset matters, because everything begins there. If your mindset is weak, every challenge feels impossible. But if your mindset is strong, every challenge becomes an opportunity to grow, to improve, to become stronger. But most people never reach that level because they choose comfort over responsibility, excuses over action, and slowly, they build a life based on limitations, not potential. And that is why they stay average, not because they can't rise higher, but because they refuse to think stronger. Most people are not lost because they are incapable. They are lost because they have no direction. They wake up every day, but they don't know where they're going. They move, but without purpose. They work, but without meaning. And when there is no direction, every path feels the same. It doesn't matter how hard you try. If you don't know where you're heading, you'll always feel stuck. That's the reality for most people. They live their lives on autopilot, following routines they never questioned, chasing goals they never chose, doing what everyone else is doing, but never asking, what do I actually want? And without that answer, there is no clarity. Without clarity, there is no focus. And without focus, there is no progress. Because energy without direction leads nowhere. It's like running fast, but in the wrong direction. You get tired, but you don't get closer to anything. That's why people feel busy, but not productive. Because being active is not the same as moving forward. Real progress begins the moment you define a direction, a clear vision, something that pulls you forward. Even on the days you don't feel motivated, because vision creates purpose, and purpose creates discipline. When you know where you're going, you stop wasting time. You stop chasing distractions. You stop doing things that don't align with your future. But most people never reach this point. Because thinking deeply is uncomfortable. It forces you to face reality, to admit that you've been drifting, that you've been living without direction. And instead of facing that truth, they avoid it. They stay busy. They stay distracted. Because distraction is easier than clarity. But without clarity, nothing changes. You stay in the same cycle, moving but not progressing, trying but not improving, living on but not growing. And that is why so many people remain average, not because they lack effort, but because they lack direction. And without direction, even your best effort will take you nowhere. Now that you see the truth, the comfort, the distractions, the fear, the inconsistency, the excuses, the lack of direction, the question is no longer why people stay average. The real question is, what are you going to do about it? Because escaping the 90% is not complicated, but it is difficult. It doesn't require luck. It doesn't require talent. It requires a decision, a real decision, the kind of decision that changes your actions, not just your thoughts. Because thinking about change is easy, but living it is different. It starts with one thing: awareness, seeing your patterns, recognizing where you waste time, where you make excuses, where you choose comfort over growth. Because once you see it clearly, you can't ignore it anymore. And then comes the next step: discipline. Not motivation, discipline. The ability to act, even when you don't feel like it. To show up, even when it's hard. To continue, even when results are slow. Because this is where most people fall. They start, but they don't last. But you have to be different. You have to become someone who doesn't stop. No matter how slow the progress feels. No matter how many times it gets difficult, you keep going. That's how you separate yourself. Not in one big moment, but in small decisions, repeated daily. Wake up earlier, focus longer, work harder, stay consistent, cut distractions, face discomfort, take responsibility, and most importantly, know where you're going, because when you combine vision, discipline, and consistency, you become unstoppable. Not overnight, but over time, quietly, slowly, powerfully. And one day, you'll look around and realize you are no longer part of the 90%. You are not average anymore, because you made a choice most people never make. The choice to change, the choice to act, the choice to become more. So remember this: average is not a destiny, it's a decision. And today, you can decide to be different. Stay focused, stay disciplined, and never go back to the life you're trying to escape.